What's up, guys? We've got Kris Flegg here. He started his career in the banking sector before becoming the founder and director of Presentation Design Company and a certified platinum Prezi expert. Along with his team, he has worked to construct and design thousands of presentations for clients such as Toyota, Coca-Cola, Qantas, and the Australian government since 2012. Kris has personally conducted face-to-face workshops for over 3,500 people and has led the development and design of his high-stakes presentations. And we are getting him from all the way down under to be able to come onto the podcast to talk to us about presentation skills in the corporate world, in the business world, all around. So today we are going to be heavily diving into presentation skills. But without further ado, Kris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Philip, thank you for the invitation to have a conversation today, and thank you for the fantastic introduction. Really excited to be here and talk to you today. Presentations are a small world, and really excited to dive in deep of it and sort of share some ideas and have a conversation around that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this as well. Presentation is definitely a super small niche, so it's really cool to get somebody else that's really excited about talking about presentations and helping people with their presentations to really learn the impact and importance of that. And so, first thing I really want to ask is, what made you decide to get into helping others with presentations?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. It wasn't a traditional or a linear path to get here. So I originally started my career in banking financial services, where presentations were a large part of the role. I was a hopelessly average or below average presenter. And I had one of those light bulb moments at a conference where I decided I would like to get better at doing this. And so over a few years, worked really hard, did lots of courses, and had the opportunity to practice and become from below slightly average to a slightly above average presenter. And that was great for a professional experience, but was really when I left banking to pitch a startup that the stakes became a lot higher. I didn't have a big company behind me. I had to create and generate their own presentations myself. So in the process of doing that, I started to use Prezi. I was looking to try and really make an impact. And if people aren't familiar with Prezi, it's an alternative to PowerPoint where you can move around and have a zippable canvas. And it really matched the way that I thought. Now, along that journey of pitching, people liked the presentation more than they did the startup idea that I was working on. And so that was really the start of working behind the scenes. People were asking to help in developing a Prezi. So that was something that started off kind of rather organically and just sort of grew over time. So through that process of working through people with their Prezis, we really kind of spent a lot of time, again, coming from an analytical background, breaking down kind of what made the presentation work. If you don't make a Prezi that's well thought out, you end up with a big zooming mess. And so we kind of really dive deep into breaking it apart and really the structure of the presentations. And that was kind of the genesis of what we do today.
Oh, man, I could tell this is already going to be so good. A lot of times I focus in on the actual speech and everything. And I think a lot of people, when they think about presentations, public speaking, the first thing they focus on is ums and ahs. And I would love to get your input on that first. And then I really want us to actually jump into the presentation design, because that's a really interesting perspective, because of course, we're thinking about the speaking side. But what are your thoughts from the speaking perspective, not the presentation design perspective, of some of the important things that those that are just getting into speaking, or even those that have been speaking for a while and want to get better? What are the things that you have found to be the most important to fix in order to be more captivating and create more impact in your presentations?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about presentations, we often think about the delivery. You know, a presentation starts with a big idea and there's a process, but when it comes to pitching a presentation, it's that live environment or an online environment. One of the biggest things approaching that, people can feel quite nervous. It can feel like it's a huge task that they're going to be judged. And one of the things that we sort of start off with the mindset of is authenticity. So this idea of just being authentically you. We feel sometimes that we're on a stage that we have to deliver performance, and you are delivering, you are going to be judged. But starting with that comfortable thing of going, it's going to be me. I need to be authentically myself. That authenticity was really the genesis of creating a sense of connection and engagement. People don't want to be talked to and sold at. They want to feel like a connection with the presenter. So authenticity is really the starting point of the delivery part.
And how do we create that authenticity? Because we hear this all the time. But how do we actually create that authenticity? Because obviously, as we're presenting, we want to make sure that we're giving the information that
Yeah.
we're trying to present, but we also want to be authentic. And I like to say a lot of times, facts tell and stories sell. But if all you're doing is telling facts, then that gets very boring. So how do we bring this authenticity out in our presentations?
Yeah, there's going to be some almost like conflicting thoughts about that. So one part is being authentic is just making that decision to be brave and to be confident. This idea of going, I'm going to be the genuine version of myself. That's really the bedset of it as well. But the second part of that is to accept the fact that we're going to be judged. Like when we walk up to there and deliver to an audience and look to try and connect, there are people going to make judgments about the way that we look, what we say, the ideas that we share. One of the really effective ways that we've got in helping people boost their confidence and work together to be engaging that part is developing a presentation persona. So a presentation is different to a conversation. It's different to a message or recording a video. It's a live performance. And so accepting that idea of being judged, but turning up and developing a presentation persona. So it's really kind of that proactive mindset to define some of the characteristics that you'd like to come across and be related to when you present. So that presentation persona might be the idea of how you'd like to deliver in the style you like to deliver in and work towards that. The presentation persona is then an energy. So the conversation is a feedback loop. In the ways that we sort of talk on video, it's a two-way conversation. In a presentation, it's not that. So on the day, it's turning up and being yourself, being that presentation persona, but being more than that as well too, and understand that part of it is that performance and delivery. So it's turning up with 20% more energy, 20% more gestures, 20% sort of more of that everyday sort of energy that you'd have. So when you come across, that really builds that connection with the audience and they can feel the energy that you bring in. And that's the authenticity and that energy that comes together that really starts to create that level of engagement that people are looking for. The great thing about doing that is that when you go to deliver in that sense, you can feel it. When people have got that energy and you're getting that sort of energy back from the people you're talking to, it starts to reduce the nerves, makes you feel more confident, and ultimately has a impact in how you present.
Man, that is so good. And one of the big things I picked up there, besides the energy, was that self-confidence in ourselves. We have to be confident in ourselves and comfortable with who we are. And by being ourselves, we're going to then attract certain people which resonate with who we are. And of course, we're going to repel other people, but that's okay because you can't be for everybody. There's very few things that end up working for everybody. I would say like Amazon and Google are probably those things that kind of work for everybody, but that's because they cover so many things. They're essentially just a hub for everything. So it's a little bit different situation there, but you can't be for everything. You're not going to have people that just fall in love with you. And I always give this ice cream analogy, but you don't hear of people just being vanilla ice cream lovers, but you're probably going to have people that just love pistachio or love Rocky Road ice cream. And that is something to kind of get behind as far as the ice cream world, like vanilla ice cream. That's just plain, that's boring, it's basic, but Rocky Road pistachio, like those things are like, man, that's my jam right there. And you're going to get people to resonate with you. And then other people, if you're like, man, I love pistachio ice cream. Others like, oh, gosh, that sounds terrible. I don't want any of that. So when you're not just that plain vanilla, you're going to attract people and of course repel people with that. But then also this other side, you started mentioning it, and I really want us to dive into the presentation, the actual design of that. So obviously we need to have the self-confidence, that authenticity when we're speaking and presenting ourselves and how we're talking and everything. But when it comes to that presentation, what are some of the first steps that we should do in order to really just, I guess, from scratch, start to develop that presentation? How do we write that down? Because I think when it comes to the actual speech itself, you want to have some kind of outline and have some overarching idea and then some supporting points on that, and then create some stories within that on top of all of that. But when it comes to the PowerPoint, that can be pretty intimidating as well. And I know I'm there sometimes where, okay, I need to put a PowerPoint together. And then I'm like, crap, what am I going to put? Of course, I have some ideas, but I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. So walk us through this. We're starting out with a blank canvas, PowerPoint presentation, Prezi presentation, whatever it is. How do we start?
Absolutely. Well, we know with the presentation, it's really a four-step process. So step one is generating that big idea, and that's setting of the objective. What's the goal? What's the future I'm looking to change by delivering the presentation? The second part is that organizing structure. So that's the storyboarding. Most presentations break down to 3 to 5 groups of content and organize that in a logical way that points to the direction that you're looking to go. The third part is the developing of a visual aid. And the fourth part is delivery. So coming to that third part about the visual aid, the big thing to think of where people can often get confused is that in any presentation, you're the primary visual aid. It's not your slides. You may not need them. There's lots of tools out there as well. But when it comes to presenting, you're the primary visual aid. It's up to you to create that connection with the audience. They should be the thing that you're looking at. Start with the idea, do I need visual aids at all? So some people look at whiteboards, flip charts, lots of different things out there, but PowerPoint or slides are kind of the workhorse, right? They serve a function for the presenter to guide you and keep track. So the idea is it's really handy as a prompt when you've got so much going on to help guide you through. But for your audience, it's there to be able to go, well, as a secondary visual aid, how is it helping create an impact with my audience? So keeping things nice and simple. So the idea is when we start designing things, we want to have a brand and feel. So consistency is really important. So initially judging, sort of deciding on the fonts and palette that we're going to look. Then when it comes to putting the content on screen, 2 things that we look at. One is digestibility. The big problem that we've got is most slides end up as talking notes. So people write their notes out on the screen and end up reading off them, right? It's the number one complaint of presentations is they become a reading exercise. And that's a conflict then that you're creating with the audience. Your audience is reading this as the voice in their head is activated as you're talking. So you've got that immediate disconnection. So simplicity is probably the starting point. Like, what's the bare minimum that I need? And then you might be writing those things as reminders to prompt to. You don't need sentences to do that. You can just do that in simple keywords and just keep them as prompts to then present to and draw out from, but not putting full sentences in there. The second thing, the idea is people say, look, we don't need slides, or we'll just put pictures in. Pictures are great, but it's the idea of creative visualization. If you've got something to say, what's a creative visual way that you can use to bring that to life? And that could be charts or diagrams, but what are things that you're using to add to what you're presenting to rather than just notes to talk off? It's more of a guiding principle in the design part as well, but it's a great mindset to look at when you're designing slides to go, well, how is this adding to what I'm saying? Or is it just repeating what I'm saying? That's a nice kind of way to be able to work out what goes on the slide or not. When it comes to design as well, just that consistency, keeping things really neat, keeping them consistently, a consistent application of that brand along the way helps make it easy to digest and really gives that professional appearance of the slides that you're using.
And one of the things that I've heard with presentations when it comes to having that slide deck, if you put so much information on that slide deck, what's the purpose of you being there to present it? So that's a framework I like to put myself in. And of course, as I'm talking with clients about the slides in general, I don't focus on the design side of things like you do. But when I talk to them about it, I'm like, hey, we don't want to put everything on there because then what's the point of you being there? You could just hand them a PDF of the whole slide deck and whoever the management or whoever you're presenting to, and they can just read it and it's good enough. And that's one thing I've noticed with when you're in the corporate world, and you've done this a lot more than me, so I would love to get your thoughts on this too. I've noticed that the corporate world, especially when you're presenting to management, they seem to want that presentation, that slide deck to be able to look at as you're presenting rather than you just coming in and just talking. Have you noticed that? And why do you think that is that they want that slide deck along with you presenting versus just you presenting?
Absolutely. So there's 2 types of presentation that side. So sometimes people create brochure presentations, and they're the ones that are really heavy. And the ones that, in that example you said, you could just send to someone, and there's no value add that you've given in the actual presentation itself. When it comes to sort of business and corporate, when we think about report type presentations, there's a lot of data, there's information, and there's things there that people might reference and need to know. The key thing to think of, it's okay to put that in slides. It's okay if that information is reporting information or if it's metrics or there's things that people need to take away and digest later. But that presentation isn't the time to use it. It's the case of send it ahead of time, give people the chance to read and digest it. It's really hard to go through detailed information when someone's talking to it. The idea of sending that ahead of time, or even at the beginning of a presentation, giving everyone some time to kind of read through and digest that, and your presentation is the conversation around the information there. Or it might be the case of sending it through, and in the presentation, you're then going to recap and pull out key highlights from that. People like to be able to choose the information they digest. Ultimately, people, those ones, when they get them as a document, they'll flip through, they'll go to the interesting parts they like, and they need to do that as the first step before what you say makes sense, or before you can add some value to that. So giving some people some time to digest everything and then having your presentation around the key points and discussion around that is probably a better sequencing to make that a more effective use of time. No one wants to sit there and just read off a screen of stuff they've already read, or they may want to flip around to different things, right? And you're at slide 14 and they've got a question about slide 15 and you're like, please stay, pay attention to this, and I'll get to the bits you like. Let people choose what they're interested in first and then have the discussion presentation around that.
And I've noticed that presenting to management in the past and everything, that when you start presenting, they're like, hey, hold on, go back a slide. And it's like, you end up going back and forth, even though let's say you had 10 slides, you get to slide 10 there, hold on, let's go back a few slides. And it kind of amazes me sometimes, like, you remembered that it was like 4 slides ago and all this stuff, but it's like they weren't able to close that loop or answer that question that they had. And so that's something to keep in mind as well as you're presenting that. I mean, depending on the situation, of course, you're probably going to be going back and forth on slides. So be ready for that, or be ready to stop as well. I think a lot of times, and that's the reason probably why also we don't want to have all the things written down in the PowerPoint, because we're going to get stopped. Questions are going to come up. So how do you handle, or how do you navigate that whenever you're presenting to a client or a manager or somebody and they want you to go back and forth, or they want to get ahead essentially of you where you're at in your presentation? How are you handling that?
Yeah, what comes to that mindset of going, you're there as the audience's number one. So we're stuck in this way of slide thinking that we have to follow this kind of linear sequence of 1 to 17 in a logic. And that's not always what an audience wants. They sometimes want to jump around. I'm going to talk about this and have a discussion. And that's fantastic. That's what we should be encouraging. That's an interactivity and more of a conversational approach that can create something that's more impactful rather than that kind of strict slide thinking structure. So there's 2 ways of that. One is that when we're presenting to management or presenting the outcomes of information, people want to know the important stuff first. They want a summary and they want an overview of what you're talking through, so it makes sense to them first. So setting the scene about some high-level insights and finding, rather than starting off with agenda and just going from section 1, going all through the detail, and then section 2, and following that sort of like slide way of thinking, it's bringing it all up front. Here's the 3 to 5 things we're going to discuss. Here's my thoughts and sort of views from here, and having some of that discussion up front about that, and encouraging the question of, well, we could jump to number 4, we could jump to number 3, and giving yourself that flexibility. Hard to do in slides, but that's why people love Prezi, that interactive approach of being able to click to zoom. What we do in PowerPoint, if it is that sort of formal structure, and we'll have decks of 150, 200 slides that people are presenting to. No one wants to be stuck at slide 87 and try and find their way to slide 182 in the middle of the conversation. So we use a thing called summary zoom, and it's basically Prezi in PowerPoint. So what we can do is we can have an overview screen, we can have the topics that we're talking through, and be able to, just with a simple mouse click, zoom into that topic, explore that, and then come back out. So it's a way of creating that non-linear approach and more of a conversational, engaging style, still using PowerPoint, still using slides, but a really simple feature that makes that interactivity possible. And it just frees things up and creates that more of a natural energy and flow in a discussion-based conversation.
Man, that's such a great point. I haven't thought about that, and I guess I haven't personally presented on 200 slide deck presentation or anything like that myself. And that would make sense why Prezi would work out so much better, because it can be interactive. You can go back and forth on those slides and everything like that, versus PowerPoint. Yeah, you'd have to be clicking a bunch of times in order to get to it, or hold on, let's get out of presentation mode, go to the next one, come back and everything. But I do like that idea, because especially if, let's say, you're under 20 slides, it would be fairly feasible to jump back and forth, having that agenda and talking about, hey, today we're going to bring up 3 different kind of topics, and this is what we're going to cover within this, and opening it up right away to what's most important for y'all, or what would y'all like to kind of discuss first. I have a plan to go 1 through 4, but do y'all want to start on number 4, or what would y'all like to do? And then really starting there. I like that because you're really getting that buy-in immediately, and you're finding out that, hey, this is the most important thing, because you're probably going to be presenting on that more than one time, most likely. I mean, there are times where it's only one time, but you might be presenting on it more, and now you're finding out what's actually most important, because all of us have probably been there. We've been in a management round and we start presenting, and then questions come up and we don't get through our whole slide. And so we didn't even get to the meat of it because we wanted to kind of set up everything before we got to the meat of the presentation. And then we never got there because too many questions came up. So I like that you're saying have that agenda and ask for that interaction right away of where would the team like to go, or where would the managers like to go with that.
Absolutely. It's meeting people where they are. Well, just that idea that people might come to those meetings, especially from a management senior one, and they might have a burning question, and they're not going to be able to pay attention to yourself until that question's answered. And that idea of bringing all of that up to the front, because it may be the case of, well, we don't like to be able to force in a way of think sometimes. If we've got a burning question, let's bring those up and answer those first. And that's going to give relevance to the rest of what you're talking to as well. You've got some interaction, you know what people are thinking about, you're meeting where they are, rather than having to get to slide 17 and the burning question that's the most relevant thing to that person then comes up. Bring it all up front, create the interaction. And it also matches the energy between you, the presenter, and then the audience.
Yeah. It's so true. And I want to ask one more question when it comes to presentations. And this kind of goes back to, you talk about being authentic, being your true self and stuff like that. One thing I like to do where I can, where it makes sense, is bring in memes, because to me, it makes for some good comic relief, if you will, especially when you're going to these management rounds or senior management rounds. I mean, all they're doing is they're getting hit with presentation after presentation. So for me, I found that bringing in memes of some sort that relate with the content really helps out. What are your thoughts on bringing in things like that? And that may not be for everybody, because maybe they don't like to bring in the humor and stuff like that. But what are your thoughts on bringing in something that, when I think of a meme, I don't necessarily think of polished corporate kind of content there. But what are your thoughts on something like that?
Absolutely. Maybe because I come from a banking background, I like to think things in charts and graphs. So if you think about sort of over an X and Y in a 45-minute period of a traditional presentation, there's initial energy and interaction that's high because people have come to the meeting and, it's the start of something. And that just gently flows off over that 45 minutes as we present more information and people's brains get overwhelmed. And then sort of a few minutes towards the end, when people realize they might get a break and the question slide is coming up, it kind of just comes up a little bit. So the idea is, what you're talking to is great. It's modulation, and we can plan this out, which is fantastic. Whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it's really looking at your presentation over that time and how can you modulate? How can you change that energy? How can you shift things? And humor is a fantastic way of doing that. We often concentrate on the start, making impact and something to begin the presentation with, but it's about planning those moments of modulation and interesting things and transitions and humor, or things that might be confronting or shocking, planning that over a 45-minute period of time and having that as part of what you're doing in the preparation is a fantastic way to create that level of engagement. And then, again, we'll have more impact. So humor is fantastic. It's the unexpected that people, that can create that level of interest, and humor is a great way of doing it.
Good to know there. So I'll keep that up. I know one time I had it very successful. I've tried in other spots, and sometimes people kind of laugh a little bit, but I had one that was really successful. It was in front of a bunch of senior management. We had the plant president there. We had a bunch of VPs and everything like that. And we were presenting on a problem. And I don't know if you know the meme, and hopefully I can describe it kind of well, but it's basically it's the same girl. They kind of look like, I don't know if it's the same girl, they're twins or whatever. And he's holding the one girl's hand and they're walking in one direction, but you see he's looking back at the other girl, like he's really interested in that other girl, but he's with the current girl and everything. And so I mentioned about like the problem, the guy was holding the problem's hand, and then the guy was actually the person, in this case, the section leader, that it was actually his problem. And then I said, like, our solution was the one that he was looking back at. And that's what I brought up as we were going to bring him up to talk about how he felt about our solution to the problem and everything. And I had everybody in the crowd actually started laughing about that, in all these senior managers, but that was using a meme. Everybody understood the meme. Everybody then found it funny because of how we presented that and everything. So there's definitely ways to do that, but that's been the most successful one that I've found so far. And of course, you want to make sure that the quality on that meme is good as well, because I've found some like, man, this is a perfect meme, but it's super pixelated. So I'm not using it because that's just not going to look good, especially when you blow it up on a huge projector. When you blow it up on a projector or a big screen TV, it's just not going to look good even more. So yeah, making sure they're high quality as well.
Well, I just love that it comes back to that idea of being brave and trying something different. People, even if it doesn't land, it's people respect sometimes the effort of doing it. Again, it's about making sure things are appropriate in the right context and culture, and that you're not going too far out of that. But that's what we encourage, the idea of being brave, trying something different. We're stuck in this way of doing things that's kind of pretty average at the moment. And these attempts of doing new things, you'll be rewarded for it. Because I can imagine like that laugh that you get, and the energy that changes in the room from doing, is providing the meme. And it's a great summary of a problem, right? It's a snapshot of what it is. You could explain things for a long time. Humor's great. Memes are great to be able to kind of articulate sort of sometimes complex ideas into something funny, but be brave, try it out. If it doesn't work, try something different the next time. And that's the part of what we encourage people to do in their authenticity, because otherwise, what is the other option of just doing the same thing, being that vanilla, and just being another presentation that people forget?
Yeah, exactly. I like that. Be brave. And speaking of being brave and a little bit of a transition here for us, I want to talk about your book real quick. You were a #1 best-selling author of The Presentation Playbook, which is the name of your book. But something a little bit more specific is the subtitle there, which really got my attention. Obviously, you know a lot about presentations. We've been talking about that. But you mentioned winning the war for attention and make an impact. And a lot of times when we're presenting, especially when it comes to corporate stuff, me with an engineering background, very technical, we don't necessarily think about capturing attention and creating impact with a presentation. We just think about presenting facts, figures, and data and getting a decision based on that. And that's really it. So tell us a little bit about this book, and I would love to hear like why you decided on that subtitle. I'm sure there's some deeper meaning behind that. So I'd love to hear about the book and that subtitle.
Thanks, Philip. In the day-to-day work that we do, and over that period of developing a methodology of working with clients in their presentation, I was always obsessed with this idea of what would work consistently across different industries, different types of presentations, different types of presentation styles. So in the course of the years of being able to test and experiment and see what would work and what was ultimately effective and easy for people to implement, it came down to just 5 things. So the idea of improving your next presentation, it was a challenge that people have, is that presentations often creep into people's roles. It may not be core of what they do. They might be a salesperson, they present regularly, or it might be a manager that once in a while is required to present. And it can be a big task and quite daunting. So what I wanted to be able to share is some of the work that we do with clients in developing presentation into something that was easy to digest for new presenters, something that would give them a really reliable framework to work from. And for experienced presenters, something as a refresh, to bring into their existing practice and maybe reinvigorate and sort of realign how they think about the task. So that was a presentation playbook. So what we sort of defined was 5 power principles. So I think the biggest impact that you can have in your presenting is going way back to the mindset that you approach the task with, and all the good stuff will come from there. So within the playbook, it was the idea of something that was really easy to read and really easy to digest, but based on what we do in the field every day. The subtitle came from thinking about, well, what's the success of a presentation? Is it about getting a standing round of applause? Not all the case. It doesn't apply to everyone. Is it about getting a high promoter feedback, or is it about sort of getting a yes? There's lots of different ways for getting there. But when we sort of thought about it, it really is to be effective. Ultimately, presentations are about changing the future somehow. You might want people to think differently, to buy something differently, to have a different perspective, to change something as well. So we're looking to be able to change the future in some way. And to be able to get there, you need to be able to first make sure you've captured people's attention, because if people aren't with you, what you say isn't going to count for anything. And you need to have an impact. You need to make sure that what you do is going to count. So it's almost a sequencing. It's to be able to change the future and somehow in your presentation, you first need to capture and engage people and win that war for attention. What it takes to win that war is becoming increasingly challenging. The idea is that with the amount of information we have to consume, the way that we think about presentations, they're stuck in a bit of a stereotype about we turn up, someone talks at some slides, and we walk away at the end of it. We've got a selective attention that we can easily employ. So it's about doing something different to be able to win their war of attention and then really cut through and make an impact. So make sure that what you do counts and you've got some step in the way of changing the future to the way that you'd like it to be.
And so how do we start to capture that attention? Obviously, when we're going and presenting, typically, and especially in corporate world, you're told, hey, okay, cool, we've set up a time for you. You're going to come in and present. So you literally have the people in the room to get that initial attention. But how do we keep that attention? Because that's where we all struggle from time to time, or a lot of the time. So how do we keep that attention?
Absolutely. Well, going back to kind of like, it's the foundation of things. So the first thing is that mindset when you walk into that the basis of that is thinking about your audience is number one. When we go to a presentation, it's often a solo act of preparing the presentation or developing the slides. We spend a lot of time for ourselves. The idea of when you turn up to present is that you are there for your audience and what we call being a humble servant. So it really starts off with that first mindset of thinking about the audience is number one. What are their problems? How do I solve that? And what's that role of the presentation going to take place? What's the role of the presentation that's going to take place? It's going to help those people in some way. If you've got a passion for helping people and solving problems, it's the start of something that will create an impact. So that's what we encourage our clients to do, is that it's not an about us slide. It's not starting from there. It's really understanding a deep insight to our clients or our customers or our audience, working out what their problems are, working out how we can solve those, and proving that in a sense, in terms of making sure that people, don't take the assumption that people know what we're talking through, becoming a great explainer to talk through what you're doing to be able to solve those problems.
So you mean we don't have to make crazy noises or wear crazy masks or outfits or anything like that? We just need to talk about what they're actually interested in?
It's a starting point, right? And obviously there's delivery and making sure we turn up, and that's that sequence at the end. But if we turn up as a sort of a self-serving presenter, if we just read off slides and talk about things and try and just basically sell to people or talk to people or read a brochure, you could be the most polished presenter in the world and it's not going to have an impact because you've lost people. And people think, unless people think that you're there for them in somehow, you've almost lost them from the beginning. So that mindset is the number one part, is really the starting point. The number two about that, in the second principle that we've got, is the idea of starting with the end in mind. So most presentations, and being an engineer, you probably have kind of analytical in mind. Once you've set out a main objective, like what's the main thing that we're looking to be able to change from today? People thinking, knowing, or understanding something differently. Then you might be looking to influence someone to buy something or make a decision or start doing something or stop doing something. Defining a clear, singular objective, a North Star of what that purpose is of the presentation, and then organizing your content in a structure of 3 to 5 groups of content that follow a logical order to get there. Again, stuck in slide thinking, right? Why we kind of feel that most presentations don't have an impact. A lot of presentations don't have a lot of thinking behind them. So imagine if you're trying to read a book and all the pages are scattered around and we put page 42 into page 17 and the like as well. Slides kind of give the appearance of things structured in a way, but what we found in that experience early on is, again, working with Prezi and really drilling into the details, it didn't obviously have a clear logical structure to follow in most presentations. People were focusing a lot on content, but not really drawing out and going, well, what's my objective and what are the paths in getting there? Again, you could call it storytelling. We just call it really structure. But what's a logical sequence to follow? Because that starts making sense to people if you take them on a journey. If we're just talking through content, if we're just presenting facts and figures and information, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just content. But thinking about structure first and aligning that in a logical way can be a very simple process to do. But again, it's the start of something that's going to make an impact and along the way keep people's attention.
And I've had this question asked before, and I would love your thoughts on this. When it comes to presenting, like at a business conference or something, you're talking on, let's say, one specific topic, it's really easy to kind of bring in stories about your personal self, about your experience to really validate that point and help people understand the point or the information that you're trying to share with them. But when it comes to a corporate presentation, one, you probably don't have that time to go into stories like that. But two, a lot of times management doesn't want to listen to your little story. They just want to get the information. So how do you kind of bring stories in to the presentation without them being long and drawn out, where you're still kind of getting to that point. But of course, we want to make sure we're not just literally reading the slides, only giving the data. So how do you bring those stories in on a presentation in the corporate environment?
It's interesting. When we talk to corporate clients about storytelling, people hate it. It's almost a cliche. When we talk about sort of storytelling in business presentations, it's a feeling that people get, I'm not a storyteller. I think we've got the wrong context of what stories are. So your presentation doesn't have to be a story from start to finish. You know, if we think about sort of TED Talks and the like, and at that level of presentation, a lot of those are very kind of story-based in that approach. How does that relate to, a management meeting at 3:00 on a Tuesday? Well, if we think about it, the whole thing's not a story, but there's stories in the way to wrap up information and content you're talking to. And we think about that, there's case studies. So if you'd like to think about something that you're doing, think about as a case study, how would someone use what you're doing, or how has someone used a product or service that you have, or how is someone in the team using a piece of technology or a process that's taken place. There's origin stories. Not everyone knows where something came from. So if you're looking to be able to introduce something new or to change something, go back a few steps about what the origin was. Most things go through an iterative process to end a certain way. Teams go through an iterative process in terms of their current structure. So going back a little bit and helping people get into context of an origin story, it could be about your professional career and what took you to there, the origin story of why something ended up a certain way, because that gives a context of a change for the future to understand where things are, and then a future story about how the world could be different with these things changed. One of the great things that we like is a day in the life of. So if you've got a product or a service, tell people how someone might be using that throughout the day. You know, how does that move into? So rather than talking about what it does, think about how people could use it and show that in a story of someone using it throughout the day. Also, what we kind of forget sometimes is context. If you're asking people to make a decision, they're running that through their minds and they need a context to understand the implications of doing that. So if you are looking to change people's minds, if you're asking for money, if you're asking to do something, you can provide alternative scenarios. So let's have a look at the future, option A, option B, and option C of the various decisions that we're going to need to make today, and then draw those out. And that's a great way of getting people's emotionally engaged and getting thinking about what you're talking to rather than just talking out content as well. It's a great way of then showing that you've got a superior solution to option B or option C by showing a future of what it looks like if that's taken place. So we think about that, coming back to that, is that storytelling isn't the entire presentation, but there's nuggets, there's modules in what you've got. Every time that you're looking to talk through facts and information, what's a way that we could present that makes it more relatable and more interesting? And that's really what stories do.
I like that. And I couldn't help but think about like just painting the picture, painting the scenario for the people that you're presenting to when it comes to that corporate presentation, because you don't want to have the long drawn out story or anything like that. And of course that depends on the management team. Some managers do like to hear the stories, but when you're in a group of diverse audience of different mindsets, different thought processes, you can't necessarily do that. And actually, speaking of that, this will be kind of the last question here on presentations. But how do we make sure that we're capturing and talking to the different managers, especially if we're going in and we might know that, okay, there's going to be these managers from these departments or whatever, but we don't really know a lot about them. So how do we kind of build that rapport up, and how do we present in a way that they're going to want to end up listening to that presentation and capturing their attention?
Yeah.
What are some tips that you could give us?
Absolutely. The first step is research. There's nothing wrong with reaching out to an audience that you don't know beforehand. That could be an email, it could be a phone call, it could be a Slack message, and ask them questions about what their expectations of the day are. Like, what are they going to turn up with in their mind that they'd like to have answered? It's a great way. It's a step that we often don't do because we're focused on creating the presentation, but connecting with people that will be in your audience beforehand to understanding what those burning questions are or what their expectations are is probably step number one. It's fantastic because then it's going to give you a guide to talk to, and coming back to the idea of the audience is number one, they're going to set the agenda for you. The second part of that is questions. You know, the idea is the question slide shouldn't be at the end. There's that awful silence after 45 minutes sometimes where the question slide will show up. I've talked to you for 45 minutes. I've given you 400 pieces of information. Do you have any questions? And generally not. People don't have them. But encouraging questions up front. encouraging people to share their own experiences, asking questions that are open, and looking for feedback at the start of your presentation rather than the end of it is a way of pulling people into that. Now, questions are great. You're sometimes going to reveal things in those questions that are going to be challenging. So if you are going to talk to someone and someone has that burning question, it might be a big challenge of what you're presenting to that day. And it might be something different to do. Bringing them out and having them up front in that discussion is really going to help rather than hiding away. The great thing about moving to online presenting is that a lot of questions never get asked. People don't have the confidence in a group of people to really put up a question. They, in that idea of sort of different cultural and different sort of backgrounds, most people feel, well, not most, but a group of people feel that asking a question or stopping the presenter to ask a question, they don't have the confidence to do that and they feel it might not be appropriate. So if you are presenting online, thinking through what questions you might ask at regular intervals, again, coming back to that planning process over the time, is great. And then online gives the option, obviously, for those silent people who may not already have the confidence to do it in a live environment to be able to jump on and write out a question. So acknowledging those questions, stopping to answer them at the time. Some questions you might want to park till the end, but questions are a great way of bringing that out all up front.
And I like that approach of doing that at asking any questions at the beginning, essentially. We always wait till in. Pretty much always, everybody just waits till in. Hey, any questions? And then it's like silence. Or, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And you might have a brave person to say something, but I like that starting at the beginning. And that's really kind of a pattern interrupt that most don't have. And then you can immediately, oh, yeah, okay, well, okay, cool. Let's go over here to slide 4 real quick. I've actually got that information here. So let's answer that real quick. And then we might go back and then maybe we start to go through that. And then when we hit slide 4, we just go ahead and jump ahead. Okay, well, we already covered that. So we're going to, double click, get to the next slide, everything like that. But I do like that because you're immediately grabbing their attention, answering the questions directly, and which goes back to the time constraints that possibly could happen that we talked about earlier and everything. So amazing advice there. You mentioned that offline, you wanted to offer something. So I want to give you this time to be able to offer that for the audience. So go ahead and tell us about this offer that you have for us.
Absolutely. Well, really passionate about helping people manage the challenge of a presentation. And there's lots of tips, there's lots of tricks out there as well too. But just that idea of starting with a mindset is a powerful way to be able to have a different impact, to have more of an impact, to win that more of attention, to boost your confidence and start really enjoying it. Presentations can be challenging. If you embrace the task and commit to doing well, you'll enjoy the success personally in the results that you have, and obviously for that confidence as well. So that's why I wrote the presentation playbook. Simple, easy to read, and it's supposed to be able to work for people across different industries with different experiences. And what I'd like to offer for the listeners of the podcast is a signed copy. So I've got 10 signed copies for speaking session audience members. If you'd like to be, if you're listening to this at the moment, and if you'd like some simple, easy to follow ideas to be able to improve your next presentation, if you'd like to simply send me an email to Kris, Kris, at presentationdesign.co. And for the first 10 emails, we'll ship you a signed copy. Just let us know the best address to send it to. And hopefully some of the ideas in the book will help for your next presentation.
Awesome. Well, guys, definitely go check that out. If you haven't gotten any good information here, which I don't know how you wouldn't have gotten good information, but what you got here, I'm sure is going to be 10 times better inside that book. And then, of course, is something that you have physically and you can go through. And it sounded like it was a very applicable book. Like you can really apply the things in there, and you laid it out in a way that people could really be able to just take it and actually create a good presentation out of that. So that's awesome. And Kris, I appreciate you being so generous to give that kind of offer like that for my audience. And so make sure that y'all take advantage of that. Kris, if people want to follow you, where's the best place for them to be able to follow you?
Absolutely. Probably LinkedIn is where we're most active. So it's Kris, Kris, space surname, Flegg, Flegg, on LinkedIn. And we post lots of content from there, lots of tips, lots of ideas. And our website is presentationdesign.co. What we've got in the website is the lab. So we explore PowerPoint for some really advanced design and features to help try and give people inspiration. And there's lots of things there people can check out and download some free resources as well.
Awesome. Well, Kris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your valuable insights, your expertise on presentations. I love nerding out here on the presentations, the slides, presenting to management in the corporate space and everything. So many amazing things. And for those that are listening that are still hanging in, make sure you go back and re-listen to this episode. Go get that copy of that book, whether you get the free signed copy or you just go on to Amazon. Is there anywhere else that they can get that book from?
Amazon's there. It's online on Amazon. That's probably a great place for it.
Okay, awesome. So Amazon's where you can go get that at. And then make sure to go follow Kris because he is also providing a lot of great content over there on LinkedIn.
Philip, thanks for having me as a guest today. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, of course. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.